Welcome in, everyone. This is session one of our growth-based grading for nursing education webinar series. We are doing vision and our brief overview today. We are D2 Educational Consulting. I'm Dave Friedman,
And I'm Danny Miller.
and thank you for joining us today. So, on our agenda, we're going to go through our norms and guiding principles. We'll talk a little bit about our project background. We'll do an anticipatory set to make sure we're sort of on the same page. And then, really, for our discussion today, we're going to talk about what the pillars of growth based grading are. We'll talk about some exploration and some overview, and then we'll reflect and close.
Yeah, today's session, everyone, is really going to be grounded in a key tool that we hope that you'll have some time to explore a little bit later on. We want to always start our sessions, everyone, by also grounding ourselves in our norms and guiding principles, the way that we like to work, the way that we like to operate. And we like to always believe that, number one, we believe that everyone participating in our activities is intelligent, capable, and cares about doing their best and wants to improve. I love that idea there in the end about improvement, because I think that really centers all of the work that we do as learners and as educators. And of course, we have our own norms and guiding principles off to the right, everyone, on the slide. We use a version of these in our classroom learning spaces, but again, just want to present those to you as well.
And so, with those, we wanted to make sure that we're grounding ourselves in them. So, our number one is that we need to be present to participate and produce learning artifacts. It's silly to go to a PD and not really get anything out of it. So, we want to make sure that we do something, we make something today.
Yep.
That being said, the who is more important than the what. We understand that you have interruptions and that you have your life of your own. And so, if you don't make it all the way through or don't do the session guide, you are forgiven because the who is more important than the what. We say grades are temporary and skills are forever, and that's one of the cruxes that we have in here, this idea that grades go away but the skills stay with you for a long time.
Even for us as educators that get evaluated and things of that nature, right? Those things go away after a year or two. So again, the same idea applies to us as well. We also remember that no one comes to work to be a bad educator. We are always doing our best that we know to do, and sometimes we don't know what we don't know until we know that we don't know it, right?
And we presume the best in others as well.
Exactly. And lastly, everybody, in that same mindset, we believe that we are a community. We respect it, we respect each other, and we hope that we're always kind of centering these values as we work together.
Good.
So today, everybody, our session goals, again, this is the first of a series that we're launching into today. So we really want to be analyzing sort of where we are in our traditional practices and also in growth-based practices to really understand and reflect what the impact on student outcomes and learning really is within grading and feedback practices that we already employ or might look to employ.
And so, for our next step, we're looking to align and connect. We're looking to really look at where the AACN's ideas and where their practicum can come in and support growth based practices in here. And a lot of the stuff that they have already is written in to growth based mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And we also, everyone, want to be, as we learn, we want to evaluate and look ahead. We know that AACN is calling for a shift, a transition in traditional approaches to nursing education. And so we want to evaluate opportunities to incorporate growth based scoring strategies into current teaching practices. We want to look at perhaps future adaptations and future changes that we might bring to these tools. And we want to also think about how we might refine them in courses and programs, because as we use things, we get to probably improve things as well.
Outstanding. So, like I said earlier, we're going to spend a lot of time on how we have worked to try to realize the AACN shifts in terms of growth based grading, specifically when it comes to some of the tools used with the UVA School of Nursing.
Exactly, exactly. And what we've been doing so far, everybody, is really working in close consultation with a core group of faculty, some of whom might be watching this content today, to provide consultation on grading and assessment tools to incorporate this growth-based, competency-based framework as opposed to a task-by-task sort of traditional framework.
Exactly. So, welcome in. Thank you so much to our facilitators, Will and Crystal, for helping us on this journey. If everyone would take a moment really quickly and scan the QR code or grab the link out of the chat, we'll use that to access our guide for today's session. So, we'll give everyone just a moment to go ahead and get set with that.
And if you didn't get it before, there it is again, everyone. We're going to start with a quick anticipatory set and pause. So we want to kind of throw out some questions to get you thinking, a quick agree, disagree, Likert scale on both of these. And if you have any thoughts or feedback, feel free to use the session guide to record that. It will send you a copy of your responses. But think about this question, everyone. Could we use the same scoring guidelines throughout multiple courses and multiple assessments in the UVA School of Nursing, taking one tool and applying it more broadly, perhaps? To what extent do we agree or disagree with that idea?
And then our second one, to what extent do we agree or disagree with the idea that students are prepared to enter the field and perform effectively when they graduate from this School of Nursing?
So we're going to take our quick first pause, everyone. Come back and join us when you're ready.
Thanks so much. And welcome back. So for this part of the presentation, we are going to dive into our 4 pillars of growth-based grading. So our first pillar is the idea of consistency. Consistency is one of the most important ones, although they are pretty much
Yeah,
they're pretty equal.
they're co-equal, really, pillars, because you don't want to really create a building where you've got mismatches in
Mismatched
those
buildings.
pillars, right? So
Exactly.
think of them as relatively co-equal as we go through.
So with students, what this really does is it allows them to focus on their competencies and skills and focus on learning skills over learning tasks by making the assessments assess the same basic skills over and over and over again.
Mhm.
Students become proficient in the language of that and the task that they're supposed to do. And so by working through the language and the task, the skills really become the thing that we assess.
Yeah, and the way that this is done and made clear is in a few different ways. Number one, it's by consistently using the same scoring tools throughout the entire course. If you, for ourselves as educators in the English language arts classroom, if we are assessing reading, we are always using the same tool to assess reading, right? And so as we look forward at the one of the scoring tools, we'll want to think about how we can use the whole or elements, perhaps just specific pages in specific assessments, right? We want to keep using the same language consistently in front of the students and in front of ourselves so that we're normed in that same language, right? Think about then how easy it is for you as an instructor to not have to learn a new tool with every new type of assessment, right? You're always using the same thing over and over and over again. So you get a little bit better and a little bit more effective and a little bit more efficient and streamlined at understanding how to use it and using it more effectively.
Exactly. And it does shift the idea of learning and assessing growth over time instead of assessing tasks. It becomes less about what a student does on an individual task and more about how their skills are shown through that task, and then giving them a path by which to improve those skills on the next demonstration.
Yeah, it's about really assessing the spectrum of growth from the beginning of the course to the middle and to the end as they develop within these competencies across, because you understand and you know where you want them to be at the end. And we understand that when they come in, they're not all necessarily at the same place. And most of them are not at the end point when they start. And so we can then use this consistent tool to keep charting that progress for them so that they can keep kind of marching through that path toward mastery, toward that end point. This really allows there to be really no accidental bias. There's not going to be that one-off, that flash in the pan performance that then skews the average in such a way that this student gets a grade that they don't necessarily deserve, right?
Exactly. By rooting it in the AACN language within the scoring tool, it really eliminates any bias that we as educators might put into the assignment.
Exactly.
And not only is the tool itself grounded in that, but like we have some of the philosophy that's grounded in the AACN language in terms of what they say in terms of constant and ongoing going accession. Excuse me. All right.
Assessment and feedback.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
feedback. All right. The fact that it's reliable and the fact that it's frequent as
Mhm.
well. The more frequency we have with that, the more students have a chance to practice and the better they are at the end.
And one thing that's not mentioned here, but I think is kind of floating in the background as well, is the element of trust and fidelity in the feedback and the meaning of that feedback, right? I think that's another element of reliability that's brought out within the language here as well.
Exactly.
So consistency is really the first pillar here when it comes to growth-based grading.
Moving on, our next pillar of growth based grading is transparency. And with this idea of transparency, it comes from using that consistent scoring guideline and making clear to students what the expectations are and what they're being assessed upon.
Mm-hmm.
It also makes clear the connection between skills and grades.
Yep.
It becomes less about how do I get an A on this particular assessment and what skill do I need to do in order to be successful.
It also has both the student and the educator, I think, approach the idea of there is an objective standard by which this mastery is, right? By what there's an objective standard by what it looks like, and you as the instructor can continue to come back to scored exemplars and objective measures and tools and examples from previous years, for example, to show like, no, this isn't it because this is what it looks like. And if you want to be able to do this, you have to then be able to do A, B, C, D, so on and so forth, right? And again, allows you as also when you're greeting them at the beginning of a course, you can then have that conversation with them about how the previous courses that they've taken in this program or the previous work that they've done in perhaps other coursework ports over to this course. This is how we kind of see how all the parts sit together because there's those transparent connection points that they can see, that you can all see together.
And it really drives them not only back to the previous classes, but back to your syllabus to know what those expectations are and what the skills are that are covered in your class.
Exactly.
And by doing that, what it really does is it puts your theory into practice. And we have this idea that nursing education sometimes can exist in the didactic and sometimes can exist in the clinical. And what we're saying is that it exists all the time, everywhere,
Right.
all at once.
Right. And it allows, I think, that mitigation of that question of, well, why do I have to take this course? Didn't I already do this? Didn't I already get an A for this? It's like, yeah, you did get an A in that course perhaps, but now this is how we're taking it to another level of complexity. This is how we're sort of extending into this framework of the skills and competencies. This is how we're sort of, again, this is that larger purpose and that larger framework that you can communicate a little bit more clearly and that they can understand a little bit more quickly.
And this again drives students to have relationships with each other, relationships with students, and it allows staff to have better relationships because we're collaborating together to have clear expectation. It becomes less about a grade in an individual course and more about how the student is progressing through the program as a whole and how they've built from the first semester to the second to the third to the fourth in order to really define those outcomes.
Exactly.
And make them clear and again give meaning to theory as the AAC and language dictates.
Exactly. And again, the question remains as we think about all of this, how does all of this help students to grow? Well, again, we're showing them clearly that in a very transparent way, and again, in a consistent way, if we think about the first pillar for a second, right? Because we don't want to forget about one while we think about two. There is a Venn diagram kind of going on here, everyone, as we transfer across. So we really want to think to ourselves again, how does this help us to build, how do these tools also help us to build relationships with students where they are sharing some of the cognitive load of instruction with us, right? They're understanding it in the same way that we are. Again, that theory and practice kind of works in two ways here.
The other thing that I was just going to say as you were speaking is the idea of student ownership.
Exactly.
Is it really gives them the ownership over their learning because it gives them the language and it gives them the path to improvement. So it becomes less about my instructor didn't teach me that and more about, I need to learn that in order to be successful.
And on that point, really quickly, everyone, that also helps us as faculty to have better relationships with each other because then we can talk about perhaps, we didn't get to that in the course because of whatever reason, so there's going to be a gap there, right? We can sort of pass them off to each other a little bit better because we have this same objective, clear, transparent framework that we're using to all speak about them and share that data conversation. So let's go over to AACN for a second. What do they say about all this? Well, let's go back for 1 second there, Dave. They want things to be clear, right? Their competencies are clear, their objectives are clear, and they lay it out for us. So why shouldn't we as well? Those defined outcomes that are there for us, they show us what the competency looks like at the end of the course. And again, that gives meaning to theory.
So the biggest thing about this part is that it is simple. We are trying to streamline as much as we can and try to make sure that nothing is being hidden. A lot of times when students get back an assessment, they take it personally. Oh, this professor doesn't like me, and that's why I got the score within there. So what we're saying is no, we're linking this back to the AAC and standards and trying to show you how those standards appear in a given task and how those tasks not only show up in these assessments, but how they parlay into nursing practice as well. It
Hmm.
allows students to recognize where they're doing well on any individual skills, but also where they might have skill deficiencies so that we as instructors can target those deficiencies
Right.
and also build on those skills. So when we have a class who's doing great, we can tell that next professor, hey, they're a really excellent group.
The other thing that this allows us to do, everyone, is that within a particular assessment, we can really show them their performance on the disparate skills or competencies within that assessment. We are aware of the way that we build assessments, and we are aware that we might be assessing multiple skills or competencies within one snapshot. But is the student aware of that? Are they able to really have that ownership and that partnership with you? Taking this approach kind of allows us to do that in a very simple, transparent, and consistent manner where they're able to say, oh, this isn't just a discussion board post. This is a discussion board post about clinical practice. This is a discussion board post about professionalism. That's where that late penalty is what's so important, is because it's about the professionalism standard. Again, you're able to clarify the purpose and through lines to get that buy-in from students a lot faster, right? That allows us to connect again class tasks to portfolios. We'll talk about a portfolio structure in a few other sessions down the road. And again, it's this shared kind of framework that I think is really, really important.
Exactly. And by allowing students to have this voice and to have this power, again, it gives them ownership and it puts them in control of their learning.
Hmm.
Lastly, what we have is the idea of incentives. Nobody really wants to do anything without any sort of a benefit to it. And so, what we really want to do is point out to the students is that they will be better practical nurses by the time that they are done because they will have a better understanding not only of what they're able to do and what they're not able to do, but an understanding of paths to improvement.
Hmm.
They'll also have better relationships with you, and with better relationships with you comes better understandings because you are the professionals in the field. And by having that mentorship and having that professional at their side, they can't help but grow.
Yeah, one of the things that Dave and I have said a lot about this work, and one of the titles that we actually put on our research paper a few years ago, everyone, was actually the title De-weaponizing Grading. And that's one of these things that leads to better relationships, right? The grade and the feedback, sometimes the grade is so weaponized that the feedback is completely ignored, right? They don't even look at it because they're just looking at the grades. And this shifts the power to the feedback because the growth and the development, that's the goal, right? The improvement of the skill, that's the goal. If we do that, the grade will come. And this kind of philosophy and these structures make that really real and living to students as well,
Yeah.
right? Again, for you as professors, for you as faculty, you will see that they're more clinical ready faster. They're not just able to do the thing because they can do the thing, but they understand what it means and they understand the idea of the complexity of being able to do it in a variety of situations in the moment.
Exactly. We have students who aren't punished for what they don't know in the beginning, but they're rewarded for growing over time and rewarded for reaching those benchmarks. Really rewarding for, as AACN outlines in their language, for learning and growth. And that allows you to have higher achieving students and less reteaching. It really emphasizes the feedback and the readiness in there and puts an emphasis on the development of the competencies as it pertains to professional nurses.
Exactly, exactly. And so, what we're going to do now, everyone, is we're going to hit another pause point, and we've got some time for you to explore a few resources that really are the center of this work. So, you've got the Typhon scoring tool, which is the current use scoring tool. So, for many of you, it will look very, very familiar to what you're used to because you're using it right now, most likely. And then you'll see the second version, which is the growth-based Typhon scoring tool. And again, you'll see that generally it looks the same, but there are a few slight tweaks and differences that you might want to notice as you go through. You'll also notice the learning outcomes that are used within the School of Nursing, within the various programs that kind of guide the AACN competencies into everyday practice at the University of Virginia. So we got some guiding questions to take you through this time, everyone, but focus on the shifts. The shifts that you might notice between the current scoring tool and the collaboratively revised pilot tool.
And in the same way that we're asking students to look for through lines and look for connections, we're asking you to say, what connections do you see between the pillars of growth that we've explained here and what we've put together for you in any of the tools that you're looking at here today?
And again, everyone, consider as you look at the growth-based Typhon scoring tool, the pilot tool, for example, consider how that could be used in a variety of classroom situations and contexts, right? Maybe just using one row or one page as opposed to the whole thing. So again, feel free to explore for around 10 minutes or so. We'll take a pause and we'll be back to close out our session today.
Happy exploring. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to take a few minutes and we're going to be diving into some of the excerpts from the pilot scoring guide.
So this first excerpt that we're looking at, everyone, is from page 7 of the scoring guide. And so if you have it open while we're sort of exploring some of these snapshots, please feel free to look at it with us. And so what we wanted to point out here, everyone, is the idea of coding the competencies, right? And this gets us back to the idea of that transparency and that simplicity, I think, a little bit as well. Wouldn't you say, Dave?
Yes.
So again, what we want to see here is that we're taking the learning outcomes of the larger School of Nursing, right? And we're taking those buckets, but we're also then diving into the specific competency that is being measured in that place. And what we can then do is we can then take that and go back to our AACN document to show the student, well, this is what it looks like at these various levels of completion, which we kind of have over to the right with the scoring with the actual numbers and the actual like columns that are going on here.
Exactly. And so one other thing, just pointing out that the overall category is coded. You'll see at the top in the bold 1-3A, 1-3B, so on and so forth. But then the individual rungs of the rubric are also coded in there so that students can know if they have some support needed, what specific standards they need to look at in order to improve. And they might know where those show up on the next assessment so that they can highlight them for you in order to show that they've made that improvement.
The other thing is that we didn't look at, for example, the revised DAP worksheet, but you'll see, like, if you were to look at that, you would also see the ways in which that coding exists in the assessment as well, right? With particular reflection questions, we're guiding the students back to some of these competencies. You can also see how with these competencies, it also asks us as the evaluator or as the instructor to kind of take a step back and not just run through all the rows of the rubric in one sweep, right? But we've really got to kind of see here the way in which that first competency set, 1.3, 1.3B, 1.3A, is really different from 2.5 and 2.6 and so on and so forth. And so it forces us to really assess the student where they are in that skill on a more micro level to drive that improvement on a more macro level, which I think is so important as well.
The other thing that it allows you to do is, as a faculty, it allows you to say, as beginning students, they might be allowed to be in the some support needed. And that might be good enough to go and pass. And we can look at this not just in terms of the course, but in terms of the program. And we can say to them, oh, that's not a skill that you're going to be assessed until first year, second semester. Or we're assessing that right now, but in order to be deemed as proficient, you only need to be at 80%.
Right, exactly. So they can be where they are when they need to be there.
Exactly.
So this is another example of it, everybody, but this is looking at another of the competencies, which was through our summertime conversations, kind of kept coming back as one of the most important competencies, which was the idea of professionalism, right? We need students to follow the rules. We need them to be ethical practitioners of their craft. They need to follow hygiene protocols and uniform protocols and identification protocols and all of those other things to be professional in their craft.
And be reflective about those things to look at how well they're doing them and to be able to assess them without a professional on their shoulder telling them to what degree they're doing them.
Exactly. And so you can see here the way in which we've really paired that idea of being reflective in practice with being professional in their accountability. Because again, like these skills and these don't really spell out as much, but we have quoted them as well as we could in the top. There are times when we really can, each row, we really can spell it out. And there's times we have to take a larger approach. Notice how that's paired with the binary score point to the right. We now have meets or academic support needed. And I wanted to really dive in for just a second about the importance of that shift in academic support needed being the second point of the binary, right? It's not pass fail. And that's an important distinction, right, Dave?
Exactly. And so what academic support needs is, again, it's clear language for them that allows to be transparent about, listen, you're just not there yet. And then what we've done is we can give specific paths to academic support. And if this is something that students are doing with consistency, we're going to see trends over time. And so, for instance, in looking at that first row, if you see consistently that students are not demonstrating a spirit of inquiry that fosters flexibility and professional maturity, and we see that academic support needed, that's something that we can not only communicate to the student, but communicate to the other practitioners in the program so that we know that this is a student who might need support in that particular area as they progress.
Exactly. And then we also have the space down at the bottom, everybody, with the comments, feedback, and observational notes where you can lay out what that academic support plan is. So you're putting the feedback and you're creating action within the feedback. It is now meant for you to use this and move forward. We've laid it out together and we've put it right there quite clearly so that the incentive is laid out to grow and develop within that skill.
Exactly. So this is about using it consistently. And so this is a slightly different rubric. This is meant to more look at holistic skills in there, but you're going to see some through lines because we still have the idea of engagement, civility, safety, and collaboration.
And so with this part of the rubric, everybody, with this part of the scoring tool, this is this larger scoring tool that sort of synthesizes some of the buckets or competencies into larger nursing skills. And so at the end here, what Dave and I were noticing is that with some slight tweaks, I believe that currently this is really only used in the clinical courses, but with some slight tweaks, this could be used within a lot of the courses, the didactic courses as well. And so, for example, everyone, if we look at the first column, which would be our mastery area of this skill, we see always collaborative and supports group staff to meet clinical learning objectives. Well, if I took the word clinical and put that in parentheses, I could now use this row of the rubric to assess things like engagement and collaboration civility in the didactic classroom. How well does this nursing student collaborate with their peers in the didactic class? Because those who can do that and do that effectively are likely going to be able to do it quite well when they move into simulation and when they move into the clinical setting, right? As you all clearly said already in this document out to the right, this category is always applicable. This is always being assessed. And so that's where we sort of started tweaking some of the other areas of this as well to sort of show that if we just take out that clinical framework, that clinical perspective, this can be something that really glues the whole program and the whole span of their education.
Yeah, and it's really meant to be a synthesis of a variety of different artifacts that really assess where they are in this skill. And And so if you look at the second to bottom row, what we have is the idea of the professionalism, self-assessment, student reflections, the DAP, as well as observations that holistically come together to give you a snapshot on this. This is something that might be used at a midterm or
Hmm.
at the end of the semester, or perhaps to evaluate a portfolio.
This could also be what used very effectively in a sort of conversation or conference between a student nurse and you as the instructor, or perhaps a TA, because again, there's that consistency in the tool being applied, right? They get to know it and they get to start speaking and understanding the framework as well. You could easily apply this to so many different learning outcomes or learning artifacts
Mhm.
that students are producing within the courses. And then we want to really think about, again, this idea of consistency, transparency, and really kind of having this shared framework for thinking about coursework, for thinking about learning, and for thinking about the goals of the program, right? Because we know that when we share that language, we then can get to understandings faster, a little bit more effectively, and a little bit more efficiently. And so here we see that there is the same document, right? The same scoring guidelines would be going out to the students and to the instructors, right? Everybody gets to use the same tools and everybody has access to them because there's no secrets.
Mhm. And by allowing the students to do this, they can tell you if they think they need support. And then, as an instructor, if they turn in and they say they're exemplary meets and they aren't, you can
Hmm.
have that conversation with them that really is saying that you're not reflecting at the level that I need you to. And as a nurse practitioner, that's something that we need to rectify immediately. And the other thing I wanted to say really quickly before I turn it back to you, Danny, is the idea of this serving the entire program.
Hmm.
Is that this is something that is meant to follow the students from the very first day to their very last day and allows them to continually reflect and continually monitor their progress. Because we know that a nurse practitioner or a nursing student isn't going to be as good on their first day as they are on their last day, theoretically.
Exactly. And again, everyone, we know that the our guts might tell us, well, the student is just going to check all the boxes that says that they're getting an A or getting a 100. But again, when we start shifting the way that we talk about things and when we start embodying that idea that Dave just said about overall growth and development, it's okay to not know things now because our goal is to learn and to develop. I don't need you to be perfect on the first day. I need you to be able to perform at the end. When we start speaking that language more consistently, then they start buying into it as well. And they start understanding the goal of being reflective practitioners and being honest with themselves. Because now, again, we've de weaponized that academic support needed. We've de weaponized that idea of making mistakes. It's important that we know what we did wrong and not just to avoid mistakes entirely.
It also really embeds the skills and the competencies within the course and within the program. And so it really says, hey, listen, even when you're filling out your DAP, even when you're filling out your reflection questions, we are assessing those skills and those competencies as they're assessed by the DAP. And so if you're not reflecting well in your writing, then you're also probably not reflecting well in
In
your
your
nursing
in your
practice.
practice, exactly. And again, everybody, I just want to go back. One last thing is that one of the greatest outcomes of these tools is it allows you to have the conversation with the student that you really need to have. You're able to get to the heart of the matter a lot faster, and they're going to be able to buy into that conversation a lot faster because they understand the urgency of the conversation because the data is the data and everyone has the same understanding of what reality is. And then we want to kind of point that here, everybody. I think this might be one of our last little excerpts that we're looking at here today. And this is how we might think about this idea of a grade book that promotes growth and the idea of an evolving grade book that grows with the student over the course of their performance in a course, over the course of their performance in a whole program, as opposed to something that averages their past performance and kind of keeps them locked into the past as they're trying to move forward into showing that growth and development, right?
And this is just willing to accept, as it says in here, that your profession is complex
Hmm.
and that learning it is complex and learning itself is complex. And so we don't want to add to that complexity. What we want to do is we want to make the through lines and make the competencies and make the skills apparent and accessible so that we have the most confident, well prepared, knowledgeable nurses that we can, so that when people are sick and injured, they cease to be sick or injured.
Yeah, and I love the sentence that's right there at the beginning, everyone. Again, like the definition of developing changes from novice beginner to advanced beginner as the learner moves through the program of study. As Dave and I were going through a lot of these tools that y'all presented to us in the beginning of this partnership, we saw so many elements of growth-based grading that were really sitting right there. And our job was really to kind of bring those out to the fore and make them more of the key ideas here, right? And so, again, think about how these tools, if they're used consistently in all courses and all frameworks, might be able to reinforce these messages to students throughout their journey at UVA.
And make your life a little bit easier.
True.
So, as we reflect and close, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. If you'll look in your session guide one more time, again, we have our QR code here, and just looking to see where might you see some potential shifts for yourself in your practice of grading from today's session and the feedback that you've gotten today. Where do you see this as a possible point of implementation for yourself in your practice, and where might you see some hiccups, some pain points, some roadblocks that you see along the way?
Exactly, because you know your context, you know your students way better than we do, and we hope that we can work again in partnership and collaboration as we work to refine and even edit these tools even more further. Speaking of shifts, our next session, everybody, is actually going to focus on the small sustainable shifts that really bring this practice to life every single day, not just with the grading, not just with the assessment, but in the everyday interactions that we have in the classroom.
Yes. Now that we have talked the talk, we plan to walk the talk.
Exactly. And then in February, everyone, we're going to start stretching our legs a little bit for that walking as we sort of do a little bit of implementation practice with some simulated student work samples, thinking about how these students might be kind of reflective or maybe assessed within these new tools.
And then in April, we'll be walking the walk as we look at these things as they might exist in practice.
Exactly.
So, one more time, thank you so much for joining us today. We are D2 Educational Consulting. I'm Dave Friedman.
I'm Danny Miller, and we'll leave you, everybody, again with our reflect and close question about shifts that you might see for yourself. Our email address is down at the bottom, and we look forward to seeing your thoughts and reflections in the session guide. Thanks as always, and we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.